What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Dr. Andrew Fix with the code. Really appreciate you tuning in, listening to this podcast. And we're excited to be bringing back one of our interview guests again for the second time. Allie Beckmann is joining us. You may or may not have heard her on episode 98 of this podcast. She is a financial advisor, and Allie empowers mission-driven individuals, business owners to utilize their money as a tool so that their dreams become reality and in a way that reflects their values and vision for impact. As a comprehensive financial planner and a behavioral coach, she specializes in working with visionaries and creative and service-based entrepreneurs to organize and guide them on the most efficient path to financial security and building wealth. So, Allie Beckmann, thank you so much for joining me again on the code. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I'm excited to get into this conversation today. What we're probably going to dive into a lot, you guys, is sort of this interplay between how health and wealth interact with one another, right? And how one can impact the other and vice versa. But before we start any of that, Allie, can you just give us a background on yourself again? Tell us a little bit more about you and how you got into doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, definitely. So as you said, I'm a financial planner, a financial advisor these days. I have my own firm, completely independent, registered directly through the state. So that feels really good to be really totally solo these days. Yeah, I come from a unique background in that I spent 15 years working in the theater as a performer, as a director, as an educator, and everything in between. Really focused on how we can use the craft of theater to teach and empower people, not just people in the theater, but anybody. So really getting into the social emotional elements of it. I love immersive and interactive art for that reason as well. And then I also spent 6 years as a yoga teacher, as a practitioner of yoga. I'm 14 years and counting, 12 as a daily practice. So yoga and meditation are a huge anchor and foundation of my life. And I started my first business in that field, doing corporate wellness trainings, doing some private coaching. Again, my through line, whether it was in the theater, whether in yoga, and now in finance, for me is all about how I can create more access to reliable education so that people can feel more empowered and aware and confident in themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that education, like you just mentioned, that is so large a part of the job and the career that I have, the career that you have, whether, like you said, it's in yoga or in the finance world, because at the end of the day, you're still educating people. I actually overheard a personal trainer the other day mention to a client of theirs that they thought that they wanted to be a teacher, but then they realized that they didn't think they were going to be very good at that job, so they went into personal training instead. And I said,
Oh,
well, you're a teacher, right? At the end of the day, you are coaching and teaching and educating people every single day. So, and they do a great
yes.
job at it. So I think it was just kind of funny that you can look at both sides of that, and you're still educating people at the end of the day. And I think one of the other things that's definitely true is I feel like there is no single way to teach yoga. There's no single way to do physical therapy. There's not any single way to craft somebody's financial plan. There's kind of an art to it, and you have that background in art. So I think it's interesting. What was it again? Remind me that sort of like steered you towards going away from that to the finance world in the first place.
Hmm. Yeah, well, it'll be a good segue into our conversation today. Short answer is COVID. Long answer is COVID was happening. I was working at a nonprofit theater company doing a lot of education, curriculum design, facilitating, uh, loving the work, but losing money essentially. And then also running my business and trying to grow my business as a yoga teacher and corporate health trainer. Um, and COVID happened, and obviously everything shut down so quickly. I was trying to rebrand my business one day because I wanted to get more into the nuance of healthy conflict resolution, social emotional intelligence in the workplace beyond just kind of like desk yoga, if you will, and basics around how to breathe. I was working with a consultant, and I was on my own one day trying to do some of my homework and started having a panic attack.
Mm-hmm.
This was probably like May or June of 2020. And I fortunately, my meditation practice is strong enough that my metacognitive skills are strong. And I started having this panic attack, and I could almost watch my brain go offline. I could see myself getting blocked from being able to access those higher thinking powers of executive functioning and clarity, decision making. And the more I could see myself get blocked from that part of my brain, the more it instilled the panic. And once I came down from that panic attack, which is not normal, I've maybe had like 2 or 3 panic attacks in my life. I was able to do some root cause analysis and ultimately got to the root that my lack of prioritization on financial stability was at the root of all of my stressors in my life, personally, professionally, everything. And it's not that I didn't have the aptitude for numbers. I excelled at math as a young person, and I love numbers. I just also love the theater, being creative. Um, it was that I just never prioritized it. I never have been driven by money. There was also a lot of, in hindsight, adopted societal stories around being a creative professional and how that relates to money, such as you're not in this for the money, you'll never make any money, don't expect to make any money. If you do make money, you're selling out. I think those were all like silently, insidiously infecting my brain as well. But I've just never been driven by it. Also, I'm just driven by impact, by mission, by work. And so I realized that because I had so little money just like in the bank and I wasn't making a ton of money, that was the root of all my stress. It was impacting my relationships, it was impacting my health, my mental clarity, my mental awareness and mental health, my emotional health, all aspects of my health I think were suffering because of it. And so it was the moment that I said, okay, this is what we need to figure out, this is what we need to solve for. And so I ended up just trying to find a new career, not intentionally seeking out to work in finance.
Yeah.
And then after 6 months of trying to find a new job in COVID, after having a very eclectic background, a colleague of mine from a former networking group reached out, and he had been working with a very large insurance, like life insurance company at the time. And
Right.
he said, he's like, I think you would be really good at this. I always have. You should talk to someone. And so long story short, I was skeptical, highly skeptical. But ended up having a conversation, which led to another conversation, which led to me about 6 weeks doing due diligence to investigate the opportunity, and ended up saying yes because I saw a lot of opportunity for alignment with not just my skill set, but also my passion and my mission and my impact. I saw a place where they could all live in this realm. And honestly, I said, the worst thing that's going to happen is I try this. And if it doesn't work out, I'll have learned a lot and then I'll go do something else. But it has worked out, fortunately.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. And I appreciate you like sort of opening up that story for us.
yeah.
And I like the term that you used, like once you came down from that panic attack, you took the opportunity to do a root cause analysis of like
Mm,
reflecting on like, okay, what is
yeah.
actually going on here at the root
Yeah.
of these issues.
Yeah.
And that is so like that concept is so great, me hearing that, because that's exactly what we try to do with our clients, right? Like
Yeah.
somebody has pain, they have symptoms, and we can chase our tail around treating symptoms, which is what
Yes.
most people do, quite frankly. Like
Yes.
we get massages, and I'm not saying massage therapists aren't amazing. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like we do soft tissue work, we take medication, we put ointments and CBD creams and stuff on things
Yeah.
to change symptoms. But what we really need to do is figure out what's the root cause, what's the driver
Yeah.
of those symptoms, and address that so that the issue doesn't come back. Or another great example in like the healthcare industry is somebody has high blood pressure. We get prescribed a high blood pressure medication to lower our blood pressure instead of addressing the thing, the stress,
Right.
the nutrition, the lack of sleep, the whatever is
Exactly.
causing the high blood pressure. We just artificially change the number with a
Yeah.
medication.
Yeah.
Um, so what I want to do is ask you a question based off of your, sort of background in the corporate world as a corporate health trainer and like health coach, because so many people work in corporate settings, corporate jobs, sitting at computers, office buildings, whatever that might be. They sit in traffic commuting to their office building. They sit in their office chair all day in their cubicle. Hopefully they have some windows nearby to get some sunlight.
Hmm.
And then they do the same thing. They go home, and we spend a lot of time doing sedentary things for so many people. What are some of the most common, I don't know, as we're going to relate this to health and wealth, like what are some of the most common issues that you saw being present in that like work environment when you were working and consulting with places?
It's an interesting question. Haven't thought about that in a minute. I'd say honestly, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the lethargy and the just the lack of movement
Hmm.
and what that does, how hard it is to mobilize
Yeah.
when you're sedentary for so long. Um, I've always worked on my feet until I started working in finance. And so now it's like I have to take my own medicine of like, oh my gosh, I sit in a chair in front of a computer all day and it's the hardest thing. It's way harder than working on my feet all day, in my opinion. And so I think part of it is just that stagnation that sitting for so long can create, and then how that spirals, right? It spirals into a lack of motivation. It keeps your energy levels down. It can start to decrease your brain functioning, right? When you're sitting, you're compressing the front of your body, which means not only are you compressing certain muscles that would prefer to be open every now and then, but it's also compressing your breath. And your breath is the key to pretty much everything when it comes to like optimizing your health and functioning. And our breath, like, when you think about it from how it connects to our brains, if your brain is not getting enough oxygen, it deeply impacts your ability to think clearly, to regulate your nervous system, to regulate your emotions. I mean, it's a spiral.
Yeah.
So I think it starts with that sedentary nature, which can then, like I said, ultimately cause stagnation on all the layers of health, which can then impact our motivation levels
Mm,
to change it, right? It just gets like harder and harder to
yeah.
like get up and move.
Yep.
The more we get, the more of a habit it becomes to stay still.
Yeah, harder to motivate physically, emotionally, mentally.
Everything.
It's,
Yeah.
it reminds me of Newton's first law of inertia, like an object in motion stays in motion unless
Yes.
acted upon by some other force, and an object
Yes.
at rest stays at rest unless acted upon by some other force. Like people who are, you know, this is just the unfortunate reality. People who are forced to be sedentary a lot due to the nature of their job or their circumstances tend to be the less physically active ones in terms of things because
Yeah.
of that first law. Like we're so used to that, it's easy to just continue doing that thing. It is
Yep.
harder to change that and do something else that gets you moving. And that causes so many problems. So let's, speaking of like the motivation, and let's sort of dive into that a little bit. Like how do you see just as some like trends in your field now, like how do you see this balance between like health health from a body standpoint and a personal standpoint, and health from a financial standpoint, or vice versa, kind of like playing out with one another?
Can you ask that in a different way? I'm
Yeah,
not sure
yeah.
I understand what you're looking
Like
for.
what are some of the things that you see maybe be common in people's situations? Like when you're having conversations with somebody, maybe about, their financial picture. Um,
Mhm.
Somebody who leads one type of a lifestyle compared to somebody who leads a different type of lifestyle,
Mhm.
and the like a more healthy, taking care of themselves lifestyle compared to one that is more sedentary, maybe not as active, and like how those things carry over into the financial picture that in the conversations that you guys end up having.
Yeah, I've never really like thought about segmenting my clients that way. And honestly, when I think about my book of business and all of my clients, I'd say the majority of them do lean toward the healthier side. It's,
Mm,
I'd say it's at least 50% of my clients' like specific values is health,
awesome.
which is interesting in itself, though, right? Because they recognize that health is a priority and they're prioritizing their financial health and well-being as well. So maybe that's just kind of a correlation that I'm taking for granted. But I think when I look back at other people, maybe people who are less motivated to get started, I think it shows up in that inertia. It's like the fear to take action. And I
Yeah.
think there is a correlation there between the way you approach your health, because, if you are taking care of yourself requires action, it requires intention, it requires effort. And it exercises not just your physical muscles, but it exercises the muscle of action and change, right? When you're taking care of yourself and being healthy, you're keeping your body changing and
Mhm.
responsive, adaptive, right? Like you're moving and you're changing. And that concept, your brain is more receptive to it. So I think I see people there. I think there is maybe a correlation. I don't know everyone's health story, but where maybe it is linked to that maybe more fear of like actually taking action, actually starting to take the step. There's a number of people who will have conversations, and I can't say that it's for sure correlated to their health habits, but people can have a really hard time getting started with financial planning. I mean, I
Yeah.
can have conversations, and I know this isn't just my story. This is common amongst advisors. It's people will show up, they're super gung ho, they're ready to get started. They may even like start to send you information or paperwork, and then they just stop. Like they can't actually, they get all the way up to the line
But you don't
and then they
cross.
can't actually cross it. Yeah. And I think it would be interesting to like take that lens and look at maybe how their health history might play into that as well, or their health habits, if there is some sort of correlation. But I do think there's potentially a link between that
Yeah.
willingness to take action when it comes to your health and willingness to take action when it comes to the rest of your life as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Like somebody who is willing to take that like you're strengthening that muscle of that you're comfortable with change, you're comfortable with trying to progress things,
Yeah.
and yeah, you're not afraid to take that action. Why do you think it is that, because we see this in people's health, right? Like they get a gym membership, but then they don't go. And,
Yeah.
maybe it's because they don't know what to do, for example. But like people get so close, they get up to that line, but they don't quite cross it, or they stick one foot in, but then they pull it back, and then like they don't fully go for it. Why do you think it is that people so commonly will like like the idea of working with a financial planner, but then they struggle to like pull the trigger and get started?
Man, I mean, if I figure that out, like that's the $1,000,000 question, right? I mean, I don't know. I think fear, it's usually related to fear. And then like what are the sub stories of that fear probably vary. But I
Mhm.
think there's fear one around change.
Yeah.
Um, as someone who myself can have self-sabotaging tendencies, maybe there's some of that going on for people where they like can't actually rewrite the story and start to take action that's serving them. There's something preventing them. I mean, fear, I don't mean to be reductive with it, but it's so prevalent in financial stuff. And fear is such a deep, deep part of our experience as humans and our nervous system. It links to so many things. And so I think and it's why I prioritize the emotional and the behavioral side of money, because money is so closely linked to that fear and
Mhm.
safety center in our like deepest part of our brain, right? Our limbic system. And so money is sometimes, I think people subconsciously, it's relating to aspects of their personality and their nervous system, their identity and self narratives that people may not be aware of, that like what money is actually, how deeply it may actually be linked to their identity, personality, behavior. And so, if money is linked to some sort of their identity perspective that has been working for them, quote unquote, for a long time, keeping them safe, got them here, if starting to work with a financial planner, even if the outcomes are probably going to be positive, that might trigger to their brain a change in
Yeah.
this identity narrative, which automatically causes fear and avoidance.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're going like deep into the armchair stuff right now, but I do think there is a correlation where it's like money is it's just so deeply tied to our sense of safety and fear, that I think people are unaware of how it is impacting their behavior, even in ways that might not be like directly obvious, which is why I think it's important to have these kinds of conversations for people to just
Yeah,
start. It's that education, it's the awareness. Just start observing and being aware of your own experience.
totally. Well, one thing that I've heard, and I think I used to feel this way, I think I've had a big shift in my money mindset over the past, several years, changing, not changing careers, but like changing how I practice in my career has contributed to that surely, and investing in other health and wealth related things, right, has changed kind of like how I think about it. I think of things as an investment, not a cost and whatnot.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, but one thing that we know is true from a linkage standpoint, and I don't have like numbers, but if we just look at like major health problems and we look at like that graph compared to a graph of where people sit from a socioeconomic standpoint, we
Mhm.
know that people that are generally in a better financial place in their life tend to be the ones that have less medical issues, less rates of high blood pressure, less rates of diabetes, less rates of obesity, for example, right? Those graphs would be pretty much in alignment with one another. And of
Yeah.
course, there's exceptions to that. But what uh, what do you usually say to people? Because I've heard people say this before, like, well, when I have enough money, then I'll start saving, right?
Mhm.
Or once I lose 10 pounds, then I'll get a gym membership or whatever. Like once I get this thing, then I'll start doing more to help myself and my situation out. So what do you usually tell people who, maybe they are in a very challenging financial place? Um, what can they start to do to change the trajectory of their financial picture when they feel like they're just like they're in such a hard place. They're like, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I barely am making enough to
Yeah.
scrape by right now. Because I know
Yeah.
people feel the same way in their health. They're like, I see the end of the tunnel and it is so far away that I
Yeah.
can't even consider that I'm ever going to make it there. So I'm just going to stay right here because I don't
Yeah.
even know how to get from here to there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I relate. I feel like I was in that position financially for most of my adult life. Like it just felt so far away. um, I think it starts with mindset. It has to. Before 2020, even before I was even thinking about changing careers, I started going back and working on my money mindset, just recognizing how much power there is in that. And I mean, maybe I'm biased because I have been meditating for a long time, but I understand the real benefit of learning how to harness the power of your mind to serve you rather than work against you. If we don't take charge of the way our mind is working, it very often can work against us or work in ways that we're not choosing, right? So we at least want to be in the driver's seat. So I think it starts with mindset. And what that means to me is it starts with building that awareness, just noticing your patterns, noticing your behaviors, starting to get curious about why you do certain things. And so, coupled with awareness, must come non judgment. Because when we're starting to practice more of a mindfulness, non judgment is key. And if we were to break that down, it means being objective with yourself, right? Not placing a good or a bad on anything, but just simply objectively, openly observing what you're doing and getting curious about why. So start where you are, that's the only place we can start is starting to get real about where we are starting from, which in itself can be hard because sometimes we don't, especially when we're kind of so far back from the starting line, it feels like all we want to do is be anywhere but where we are, you know,
Are there
but we have to start where we are. And that's going to start with just getting an understanding of what that means. Because once we know where we're starting from, then we can start to think about where we want to go, even if that's on a short scale. And then you start to figure out, okay, if I'm starting at A and I know what A is and I know what B is where I want to go, then it's a matter of connecting the dots. What do I need to do to start getting from A to B? And it's the same thing we do when we're doing financial planning, honestly.
Yeah. Now, on that note, are there like tools or things that you use with clients to help them gain a better understanding of that like awareness and trying to figure out things about themselves, like to try and figure that out right now?
Sure. I mean, it's a number of things. I mean, the way I work with my clients when we start a relationship together, my whole first meeting with them is we don't really talk about money except for their emotional relationship to money. So part of it is me figuring out their money history. Think about your first money memory. I love that question.
Hmm.
What comes up? I want to know what their parents' relationship with money was. And I want to know what the relationship to money was just in the household growing up. So much of our money stories and beliefs we inherited from our parents,
Yeah.
you know, because that's how it goes. You internalize things as a kid. So I
Yeah, and
think
I feel
just
like there's
starting to
no financial education or like I don't remember anything from school. And
know.
especially since then I went like I know in college maybe some people get into to sales and finance and economics, whatnot, but I went through a science
Yeah.
education path.
Yeah.
So through high school, elementary school, all the way through college, I had zero education
Yes.
around money whatsoever.
Most of us did not have anything, unless you were one of the very few fortunate souls whose parents talked about it. But I don't know. I think, I also grew up in a generation where it was not polite to talk about money, right? So even with parents and kids, they're not always like talking about their financial situation. So you want to just think about that. And again, from an objective standpoint, there's no need to put judgment on your parents, but just even thinking about how they relate to money, you want to start to understand, have I learned any of that just through being their child? And you just want to make sure you're choosing what you believe, right? And making sure the things that you believe work for you. So you want to think about those observed beliefs, right? What did you learn through observing? What did you just learn from being in the world? Maybe not all at home, but school or seeing friends. I know for me, I grew up we weren't poor, but we were maybe on the lower end of middle class. And I was in a school system where there was very, very wealthy people.
Mm.
So that added to my internalizations of belief and like money mindset. And then how are you internalizing those things that you have learned and observed over the years? I like to ask people to think about their like if they were to personify money and imagine that they were in a relationship with it, like how would you describe that current relationship? Um, from a more like anthropomorphized position, but then also, based on that, what does the ideal relationship actually look like? And that's where you can start to really get into, right? If I'm starting here, where do I want to go? How do I want money to be in my life? Because at the end of the day, it's a relationship. We relate to everything in this world. So, what is your ideal relationship with money? How is it showing up in your life? Um, how does it feel? How are you using it? What is it helping you to do? How often are you interacting with it? Right? You can customize that to work for you. So, there's a few books, I love You Are a Badass at Making Money, Jen Sincero's book, specifically on money mindset. She has amazing questions at the end of every chapter. It's an amazing resource to start to really work on money mindset and just to start to uncover
Yeah.
some of those beliefs that are oftentimes so deeply subconscious and just start to bring them to the surface,
Yeah, because you just don't know until you really dig to try and get some of that information out because it's like ingrained in us. And some of
Yeah,
these beliefs, they probably happened or they started to be formed in times where like we don't even remember that far back, right? Like we might have been
exactly.
a young
Yes.
kid and you started to
Very,
hear
yeah.
things and see things and like you don't remember all of that vividly. I'm trying to think back, like probably one of my first financial memories that I can think of right off the top of my head is like we used to get uh these aren't really around anymore. We used to get $2 bills every
Oh,
holiday, Christmas from from my grandma and grandpa on my dad's side of the family. So we always thought that was so cool to get, not that it was one you were spending, right? Because it's like a collectible thing.
Yeah.
And then there were many times where I was out on the street corners with a little lemonade stand, right? Selling 50 cents glasses of lemonade. And just thought it was like so cool when someone would stop by and buy one. And maybe they'd
Yeah.
give you $1 instead of 50 cents. And like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, those are the first two things that come to mind. Now, I would imagine when you ask people those questions, though, like your first money memory or their current versus their ideal kind of relationship with money, you probably see some trends in the answers or some similarities in people's answers, or do you find that they are all over the board?
They're pretty all over the board.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, money memories different for every person.
Hmm.
Which is great because not only am I learning their first money memory, I'm continuing to learn about their life,
Yeah.
and what did you come from? Who were you as a child? What was your family life? As far as relationship goes, like the relationship question, maybe there's a little bit more commonality in the answer. Um, a lot of times money is this thing that's over there that people aren't really interacting with. It may or may not be working for them, but it's usually people are coming to me because they recognize they don't have an ideal relationship with their money. They recognize that it could be better,
Yeah.
and yet they don't know how, or they don't have the bandwidth to figure out what it means to actually improve that relationship. And again, like not just improve the relationship, but how do we take it to the next level? And how do we start integrating money into your life as a tool that's actually supporting you and acting more in a symbiotic relationship where it's serving you, it's helping you become more of who you want to be, and do the things that you want to do. So usually they're coming for that kind of guidance where they have enough awareness to realize this isn't ideal, and maybe they've hit a point too where they're like, this isn't working for me and I can't stand it anymore, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you probably see too in the health field, right? It's like you hit that point where
Yeah.
you no longer can accept what has been, quote unquote working for you up until now.
Unfortunately, I think that is all too common that in my field as a physical therapist, so many other people, right? Not just physical therapists. We often see people once they have gotten to the point where they are so tired of dealing with something that they finally need to do something about it. And it would be so much easier for them, for me, for any of my colleagues or previous coworkers, any other medical provider to work with somebody earlier on in that process.
Oh yeah,
Even if they still have symptoms, right? It could be earlier on, but man, imagine what we could do if we worked on something in a prevention aspect
I
as
know.
opposed to in a treatment or reactionary aspect. It totally changes the game, and
Yeah.
I mean, to link it to money, right? It's probably a lot more similar to a scenario where somebody grew up in a family where their parents did talk about money and they helped them start getting things set up for themselves, like at the earliest age possible,
Yeah.
and they started to just understand how to utilize money, whether
Yeah.
they had a ton of it or not, like is
Right.
besides the point. But they
Right.
understood how it works, sort of. And well, in something you said a few minutes ago, you said like people will come to work with you. They've got to the point where they realize they need to start doing something about this, but then you have seen that start to carry over into other aspects of their life, right? So like how have you seen that, like, maybe with some of your clients or maybe for yourself, like when you started, no matter at what rate, like when you started putting things in place of like starting some financial planning and putting together puzzle pieces of a financial picture, that potentially can carry over into other areas of that person's life, whether that's in personal
Mhm.
relationships, uh,
Mhm.
um, intimate relationships
Yeah.
with their spouse or significant other, or fitness and health and anything else.
Yeah, what a fun thing to think about. This is why I love my job because like the ripple of impact is kind of endless. I'm thinking the first person that comes to mind, I won't use her real name, we can call her Liz. Um, Liz came to me because money has always been the biggest stressor in her life, just like a constant source of stress, always never quite making enough and going from job to job and, just super scattered and, has basic understanding, but money largely overwhelms her. And just when we started working together, she was crying on almost every call because it would bring up just so much stress and it was linked to all these other stressors that were happening in her life. It was a very emotional experience. Within less than a year, within like 6 months, she started uh, taking my advice, doing the things I was telling her to do, doing the things I was telling her to focus on. And when we had a meeting, I think it was, yeah, maybe 6 months after her first meeting, her energy had completely shifted. I check in with our values at the beginning of every meeting. So we look at their top 5 values, and then I have my clients rate their alignment with that value at that time
Mm.
just to kind of check in. Her alignment rating was up on nearly all of her values. So she was already living in greater alignment with the things that actually mattered to her. I reflected to her. I was like, your entire demeanor, all your energy, the way you're showing up is so different than when we started not that long ago. You've made so much progress in such a short amount of time. And she said, two things that were so impactful. One, she said, I've never felt more optimistic about money than I do now since
Mm.
starting to work with you. And then she said, yeah, other people have also reflected to me that my energy has changed. I'm calmer, I'm more balanced, I am easier to be around. And so that was so impactful for me to hear that, like, other people in her community are also seeing that shift in her
Yeah.
because we just started getting all of her things together and organized and getting a plan for her to start working on the things that needed work. And again, to her credit, she did the work, right? Like, that's a big linchpin in the success of the story, is that
Right.
she did the work. But that's the thing, when you're working with a good planner, when you're working with a good trainer, they should be breaking it down for you in a way that is achievable. So you can accomplish the things that you need to do, even if it's a baby step now. This isn't going to be everything. It's like, let's just get started so you can get some of that positive momentum back to that where we started that conversation, and then stay with that positive momentum because positive reinforcement just feeds itself. So,
Yeah, and you started to talk about the values, right? And
mhm.
checking in with where people are, like, because they're the ones that give you those values, right? Like the
Mhm.
values that are things that are important to
When we
them.
do an exercise, we like figure it out together, but it's coming from them. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so you're checking in on, like, how are they living in alignment with those, how strongly are they living in alignment with those values?
Hmm.
And, like, you probably see, like you just said with Liz, that as those numbers go up, so does their how they're feeling about their financial situation.
Yeah. And vice versa.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a, yeah, it's a beautiful, again, symbiosis. It's like, to me, that's money working at its finest.
Mhm.
Let's use money so that it helps you live the life that actually matters to you. Let's use money so that you feel more like yourself than you ever have, so that you can show up in this world as the person you individually, uniquely want to be. How do we use money as a tool to support that so that it doesn't become this like blob over there that everyone wants to avoid, but rather this tool that is working for us?
Mhm. Mhm. Now, have you um there have probably been some clients, or maybe they've chosen not to work with a financial planner because of this, but there've probably been some people who had, like, a really extremely hard time, like, climbing over that hurdle, right?
Mhm.
Of the emotional barriers or anything, the mindset
Yeah.
challenges to, like, to start doing, to get to that point, to start doing anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Those people have, I'm trying to, I feel like it's not that I forget them right away, but I stay pretty non-attached to the people who don't end up working with me.
Sure.
Um, but I do recognize that and I tell this to people who are like considering working with me, like a lot of things have to come together. Like you said, it is never too early to start working with a financial planner, getting a plan in place, even if it's basic. It's never too early to start investing. The earlier it is, the earlier you start, the easier your life is going to be. Um, that being said, it also has to make sense. You have to have the right capacity for it. You have to have the mental capacity for it. You have to have the emotional capacity for it, maybe the financial capacity for it. Like it also has to make sense. Um, and so I also recognize that where sometimes things just aren't aligned yet for it to make sense. So I try to support people in that decision, not to push people before they're ready, but also to try and call out people who just keep pushing it down the road, right? Where it's just like, I can recognize those people, even people who admit to me, this is something I avoid. It's really hard for me to get going. And I can just see them kind of kicking the can further and further down the road,
Yeah.
rescheduling the meeting for a month later, like 5 times. And it's like, I see you. I mean, I had a woman do that to me. She was a referral and she just kept rescheduling like last minute. And I finally sent her an email and I was like, listen, in her like reason for meeting, it was like financial disaster, LOL. Like, okay. And I finally sent her an email where I'm like, listen, it's okay that you feel like a quote unquote financial disaster right now. Let's just have a conversation, but it can be so emotional to even confront it. There's so
Yep.
much shame. And like the further we kick the can down the road, I think that shame only builds. And
Yeah.
there's all these like pressures we put on ourselves of where we're supposed to be by the time we talk to a financial planner, which I really resist, but it's there and it's real for people. I have one client right now who is kind of teetering on that edge where she's really struggling health wise and wealth wise. Um, and she's it instead of the positive momentum, it's like the vicious spiral down, right? And so I'm trying to do my best to support her. And again, root cause, where it's like, where do we go? Where's the deepest source we can go to start to fix this
Hmm.
problem um, that we have control over? But I can see how the struggles in her physical health and her mental health really make it that much harder to address her financial health or lack thereof, and vice versa. And
Hmm.
I don't know, it's different for every client, but again, it's like no matter how small it is, like the littlest things can make a difference. Um, and the more we keep putting it off, really, the harder it gets. And then the less options you have. And like when you think about the cost, it just goes up and up and up. And so, yeah,
Yeah, it
it's tough.
does. And like you said, sometimes the smallest little details can make such a big difference for better or for
Yeah.
worse. And um, I think those scenarios are for everybody, me, you, anyone else, are always the hardest where you feel like you are struggling or in a bad place in many different facets, right? Mental health, emotional, relationships, physical health, financial. And what's daunting and probably unrealistic is to try and tackle all of those things all at once, right?
Right.
You
Right.
just, like you said, whether it's the root cause analysis, however you decide to, you just need to pick one and
Yeah.
start to address that. And then what starts to happen is there's this like waterfall, snowballing effect in a positive way of like
Yeah.
that starts to bleed over into the other areas. And then you knock the next domino down, then you knock the next domino down. Um,
Right.
and I think, I'm thinking of this like um, health and wellness kind of pyramid in my mind of like,
Mm.
we've got the base of the biggest foundational piece, and then we got smaller pieces as we go up to the peak of the pyramid in order of like what is most important for us to start with. And like as it
Mm.
relates to
Mhm.
health, sleep is probably at the bottom of the pyramid, right?
Yeah.
And you could
Yeah.
argue it's other things, but I would say sleep is probably the most important thing that we could start with and focus on. And
Mm.
nutrition is probably pretty close to the bottom of the pyramid, what we're putting in our body.
Yep.
And then what comes up as you go up the pyramid are things like our exercise routine, our movement habits. What's probably at the very top is like the sports recovery things that we're doing, right? The massages and the
Yeah,
compression boots and like that stuff doesn't matter if you're not doing those other things.
right.
Without, obviously everyone's situation is unique and everyone comes to you at a different point in time. But is
Yeah,
there like a pyramid, so to speak, of like the financial planning picture, like
yeah.
in your professional experience that you found like these are the things that people should start with as a good foundation, and then this is what you should probably do next, and then as you go up, we can start talking about these other things.
Totally. Yeah, definitely. I love that image and correlation. Coming back to that starting where you are, I think it has to start with like the organizational piece. Understand cash flow to me is so foundational. And I think a lot of people skip it. But if you don't understand and have a clear understanding of what's coming in money wise and what's going out money wise and how those numbers relate to each other, you don't know if you have a surplus every month. You don't know if you have a deficit every month. You need to know your money flow. So, getting an understanding of your income and your spending, your cash flow, that is, I think, foundational to everything because whether you have money left over or not is going to inform anything else that you can do strategy wise. So I'd say getting an understanding of that awareness has to come first. From there, I'd say the next piece is savings and debt. You want to have an understanding of, you want to have a safety cushion. You want to have some cash in the bank for emergencies. Figuring out what that number is will be different for everybody. There's a number of ways you can go about figuring out what that safe number is for you, but the easiest way is to just say, what number makes me feel safe, knowing I always have it in the bank ready to access at any time. That's
Yep.
the easiest way to think about it. Second easiest would be more of the standard financial planning advice is like 3 to 6 months of your living expenses, maybe more for entrepreneurs. So, getting your savings, getting a savings plan and, automating it depending on how much money you have left over every month. Then you can
Right.
decide, okay, I'm going to put this much toward my savings, automate it, make it easy for yourself. If you
Mhm.
have debt, like high credit card debt, kind of that unhelpful debt, I'd say that is a close second or an equal priority when it comes to savings, because oftentimes you go into debt because you don't have cash savings, right? You don't have that surplus. So, if you do have high credit card debt, that is something you want to tackle sooner rather than later because it can spiral out of control pretty fast. So, I'd say savings and debt are kind of equal. Then we start looking at investments. You really don't want to start investing until you have stability in your cash flow and some savings, right? Because investments should largely be for the majority of us for the long term. And so you don't want to have to invest your money and then have an emergency and not have any cash and then have to take money out of your investments because
Right.
you're really shooting yourself in the foot when you do that. So that's why you want to have some cash before you start investing because ideally you're not going to touch that money for a while. So that pyramid of investing is kind of like, do what you can with your workplace plan if you have one, put as much money in as you can in there, and then figuring out individual investment accounts. You generally want to max out the tax advantaged accounts before you start looking at just straight up taxable accounts. So, right, that's we're getting higher up the pyramid here because then once you kind of max out your employer plan, maybe a Roth IRA, you're kind of getting all the tax benefits you can out of these various investment accounts.
Right.
Then we start to look at alternative investments, real estate investments, different kinds of investments to round out your portfolio. And then once we get higher up the ladder and the pyramid, then tax strategy becomes more important. Then estate planning becomes more important at a higher level. That being said, everyone should have a will. If you have children, you should have guardian assignments. Those are also very, very foundational. I didn't talk about insurance. I'd say insurance comes, probably between savings and debt and your investments, somewhere in that line, just
Yeah.
because you want to make sure you're protecting yourself
To
before
clarify,
you start taking some
like,
risk, right?
yeah, to clarify, more of like a life insurance scenario or disability insurance or
All of
something.
it. Yeah. I mean, all of it. Like, if someone doesn't have health insurance, it
Mm,
is the first thing we're going to talk about.
yeah.
You
Well, yeah.
know, like that needs to happen first before we start looking at opening up a Roth IRA.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Mhm.
yeah, I'd say there is a hierarchy of needs when it comes to insurance. Yes. But, we're generalizing a little bit here.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and you're
Yeah.
you're right on the will and the estate planning side of things. My wife and I, well, we have a 3.5-month-old now as of this recording. We just did some edits to our documents to put in place like who's going to be
Good.
making decisions for and taking care of him if we are unable to
Yes.
do that.
Yes.
So,
It's so important. So I'd say that's high on the priority list or low on the pyramid, whatever
yeah.
way we're looking at it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's super helpful like just to kind of get an idea of like where can somebody start? Where should somebody start? Where do these conversations normally start? Because I think if somebody listening to this has not already done so, had a conversation with a financial planner of some sort,
Mhm.
they might just be unsure of like what they're
Yeah.
even getting themselves into, and then maybe not want to do it because they don't know what they're,
Yeah.
what door they're opening up. They don't know where that's
Yeah.
going to go. So I think the stuff that you laid out, the gentleman that I've been working with since shortly after I got out of college, like we have had a very similar conversation. So it's cool to hear you guys having a very similar layout. And those are pretty much the order of like things that
Yeah.
we focused on. So uh,
Yeah.
no, I think that's great. And that probably gives us like a good place to kind of like wrap this up in terms of, if you're even considering it or you want a second opinion or something like I think reaching out to Allie or like at least knowing like, hey, this hierarchy, like you said, of the pyramid or from the base building up towards the top is a good starting point or a good launching pad to jump off from.
Yeah, I like I said, start where you are and be as compassionate with yourself as you can about where that starting place is. There's kind of the emotional starting where you are, understanding where you're at emotionally, mentally with your finances. But then there is that tactical piece that you can start to do on your own, right? Figure out what's coming in, what's going out, get your cash flow understanding. And then you can also tally up your assets and your liabilities. How much do you own and how much do you owe? And that then starts to figure out your net worth. And like those numbers are the foundation for anything you're ever going to do.
Mhm.
And a lot of times it's scary to figure those numbers out because maybe we've had avoidance, we've had shame, we have fear around what those numbers are. Almost every time I have a client who has a lot of debt and I show them their net worth for the first time, almost all of them say, that's not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Mm,
um, and so it's just, you got to take that first step and just get the awareness of where you're starting from emotionally, but also tactically. And it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can always start to cultivate that awareness and that mindset and never underestimate how far that's going to take you.
yeah, huge in all areas. So yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Uh, Allie, before we sign off, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you in case this conversation sparked some more questions, thoughts, considerations, and they want to reach out to you to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say my website or LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can find me, Allie Beckmann. There's a rainbow on my cover picture in case there's more than one of me, and that's a great place to connect or follow me. And then my website is beckmannfinancial.com. Beckman is spelled Beckmann financial.com. So a lot of good resources on there, ways to get in touch, subscribe to my newsletter. It's free, educationally driven. Those are the best ways.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll put those things in the show notes, you guys. And man, I hope you enjoyed this conversation, the second conversation with Allie, and listening to us talk about health and wealth. And just want to thank you again for tuning in to this episode of The Code. We really couldn't have this show without you. And if you're a first time listener or you've been here before, you know how important reviews can be for a podcast like this. So if you've not already done so, it would be huge if you could scroll to the review section or whatever podcast platform you're tuning in on and drop a review on there. We're trying to get this show up to 200 5-star reviews as we just continue getting it out to more eyes and ears. So thank you guys in advance for that. And Allie, I hope you have an awesome, awesome rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great.
Cool. Thank you guys again. We'll catch you on the next episode of The Code. See you later.